So for the bat, the first thing that you need to do before doing any modeling, and this goes for anything that you ever model, whether it's a simple thing like a bat or in a flat, or something a little bit more complex like the cap or anything else, we need to study. We need to plan. We need to find reference. It doesn't mean that we have to make realistic props all the time. You could make a big cartoony bat that's like weirdly proportioned, but it all comes from studying the actual material first. Because if we don't study it, we're just going to make an approximation of what it should look like. And I've talked about this a lot before, but it's the bike theory in this case. Bike theory is, imagine trying to model, in this case, or we'll say draw, it's a little simpler. Try to draw a bicycle, but don't look at reference. Most people won't actually be able to draw the bicycle properly because most of us know what a bicycle looks like. Most of us have probably ridden a bicycle at some point. We know bicycles. And yet when we go to try and draw one or create one, what are all the pieces that go into a bicycle? What's the frame shape like? What's the handlebar shape like? What angle is the axle? And all the different pieces. Where are they in proportion to each other? How big are they in proportion to each other? It's hard to say. So what we do is we look up a reference and we figure out, oh, that's what a bicycle is like. From there, we can push it and exaggerate it. It's the same thing with our animations. If you're just trying to animate a motion from memory, it's usually not going to feel right. You want to start from reference, study it, learn from it, and then exaggerate and push it into something new. So that was the first thing that I did. And I just used PureRef here. PureRef is a great program. It's totally free. And I think there's a... Is that it? Yeah, there you go. So there's the link to it. It's basically a program that allows you to just drag and drop images from online, from your computer, and organize them together to use as reference or as just kind of a cheat sheet, I guess you could say. So I just grabbed different images of baseball bats here to help kind of keep track of important things that I want. So, for example, how big is a baseball bat in comparison to a person? I also have a sizing chart here it's very blurry, I apologize for the size of it, for the size of a character versus the baseball chart. I don't know why it saved super blurry on this one. I've got the different proportions for baseball bats, as well as just terminology, because whenever I'm modeling something, I also like to use it as a time to learn about whatever I'm making. So we've got all that. The other thing that I wanted is some close-ups of the ends of the baseball bat. So I've got these here just to see how it's shaped so I can get the finer details. It's not super important to have that, but I like to have those just in case. So in this case, a baseball bat, like I said, is pretty simple, so not that important to have a ton of reference. But the more complex that you go, the more reference you will want to have. And for some models that I've done, like I've got reference of the different bolts and screws that will go into the model that are just going to be the little tiny details that no one's really going to see, but I want to make sure that it just looks real. That it doesn't feel like there's just these random bolts and screws for no reason that are just there, and it kind of just feels weird. So find your reference, study your reference. And once you have that, we can now go into Maya and start bringing things in. Now, when you're modeling, there's typically two ways of approaching modeling. The first is using image reference. So just using an image plane and modeling based off of that. That's what we're going to be doing for the baseball bat. The other way is to just model and kind of, I don't want to say wing it, that's not the right term, but just kind of create it from scratch. And that is usually used for more organic objects. So in the case of a baseball cap, because it has to fit a certain character, we can't just use a reference image, it has to fit that specific character. So we'll use the reference more as a guideline, less as a kind of follow along kind of thing. Now, for the baseball bat, let's actually just start here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to import an image plane of the baseball bat. So an actual image. And I'm just going to go to the side view here. So I just tapped spacebar to get to the quad view right there. I'm going to go to view, image plane, and I'm just going to import an image. And I've got it here on my desktop right there. And there's our baseball bat image. Now I'm just going to move it back here off of the grid so we can create the baseball bat right there. And we can start modeling this right away. There's one problem with this though. How big is the baseball bat going to be in comparison to the character? We need to know that, because if we model this right now, that baseball bat could be huge. It could be twice the size of the character, or it could be like a toothpick. We don't know. We don't have the character in here. So before I even start modeling, one thing that I want to do is make sure that I have the correct size ratio in place. The simple way of doing this is to just reference in your rig to the scene. Then you can scale your image plane up to match that rig. And then there you go, you're done. The other way to do it is to know your size scale, your scene scale. So scene scale essentially means how big is one unit in real world terms. So for example, if I create a polygon cube here, this cube is 1 unit by 1 unit by 1 unit. And you can see here how it matches to the grid. 1 unit by 1 unit by 1 unit. And that matches the scale here, 1, 1, 1. And the size here, 1, 1, 1. So what is a unit in Maya? Well, by default, a unit in Maya is 1 centimeter. So you can check this here if you go into your settings and preferences under, let's see, I think it's settings here. Yeah. So working units. Right now it's centimeters. And you can change this if you want to. I recommend using centimeters. Most people use centimeters here. So that means that every unit is 1 centimeter in length. Great. Well, if you know that your rig is also modeled to these real world units, which all of the AM rigs are. So for example, the Jules rig, which is the rig we're going to be using for our scene here, is modeled in real world centimeters. He is about 6 feet tall, or about 170 centimeters tall, about somewhere around there. So if I just make sure that my bat matches real world units, I'm good. Now, with some studying, again, this is where planning and doing all the research is important. A typical baseball bat for a 6-foot person is about 34 inches, 33 to 34 inches in length, which is about 83 to 86 centimeters. So as long as I make sure that my bat is that long here, I'm good. Now, all of that is really complex to just say it out loud. Essentially, it's just make sure you know the length of your object in centimeters. That's it. So in this case, I know that that bat should be about 86 centimeters. So I'm just going to take a cube here and I'm going to scale it up. Let's take our scale Z and I'm going to go to 86 right there. So that's the length of our bat, how long it should be. So now I can just take my image plane here and scale that up. to match that. Something like so. Oops. Yeah, right around there. Doesn't have to be perfect. I'll probably go a little longer, actually, just because it's 86.36, I believe, for the exact measurement. But right there. Now I know that that bat should be about the right length for the character. And if I'm not quite right, well, I can just scale it up or down a little bit once I get into the scene. But at least I've got that initial size approximately there. Now again, the other way you can do it is just to bring your character in, match it to the character, and then you're good to go. So with that, we've got our baseball bat in place right here. To model this, essentially when you're modeling something, the best thing to do is to simplify shape or simplify the object to its most basic form, most basic primitive. Is it a cube? Is it a cylinder? Is it a sphere? Is it a pyramid? What is the most basic form? And then we can use that to build from there. In this case, a baseball bat is essentially just a cylinder. That's really all it is. Just a very long cylinder. So I can just go to create polygon primitives cylinder. And let's rotate that right there. And I'm just going to match it to this object here. So let's scale it up, and I'm going to select the vertices. Now we're going to be selecting a lot of vertices, edges, faces, all of that as we're doing this. The easiest way to do this is to just right click and hold in the viewport, and you can select all your different components right here. So components are the pieces that create an object: vertices, edges, faces. And then you can switch back to object mode right here. So I'm just going to select some vertices on the end here, move these over right there, match the end there, bring this over, match the end right around there. Okay. Now you'll notice that we can't see the bat anymore. So you can either go into wireframe by hitting the 4 key on your keyboard, or if you would prefer to be able to see the object, or see the material, you can go to shading and go to X-ray mode. And now you can see that slight bit of shading on there too. Now, one thing I'm noticing is, see how the baseball bat image is a little crooked? It's kind of lower here, even though it's centered over here. I'm just going to move my pivot point of the image plane to the end here, and I'm just going to rotate this ever so slightly to center it, just like that. So the way I move the pivot point is I just held the D key, D as in Delta, and then you can just slide the pivot point wherever you want. Now, another thing that can be very helpful, this is a minor thing, but it can be very, it's how to put this. It's a very simple thing, and once you kind of realize it, it's like, well, duh, it's so simple. But a lot of people don't realize it. Let's say I need to rotate this, and I need to be very precise in my rotation. And I want that end here to get right into that center. Well, if I just click and rotate here, it can be very hard. You can see how I just don't have the precision here. I just can't get it there. If you need more precision with a rotation, keep in mind that the pivot point is over here. The further you get away from a pivot point, the more precise your motions are going to be. So if I click and drag to rotate and then just move my cursor way out here, I'm still clicking and dragging, and now rotate from here, I have super precision. Look how much I can do these tiny little tweaks now, right in here. Versus if I rotate from here, and any tiny little move is just swinging the bat. See how much I have to move my mouse? You can barely even see the cursor moving, and it's just swinging around. Versus if I do this, oops, let's make sure I do it in a straight line. If I rotate this here, now I'm getting big motions for very little rotation. So keep that in mind. This applies to like when you're animating and you want to make a little maybe subtle jaw motion or little hand motion, finger motion. Just make sure you're dragging away from that pivot point there. So we've got that centered up. At this point, all we need to do is start shaping the bat. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. For me, I like to use the multi-cut tool. So the multi-cut tool you can get through in your modeling menu set under, I believe it's Mesh Tools, Multi-Cut right here. The way I always get to it is you select your object, hold down Shift, right-click, Multi-Cut is right here. Now, the multi-cut tool essentially allows you to add divisions along an object. So if I click on an edge here, I can just kind of cut along and add detail. But if you hold down Control, you can add an edge loop. That's just going to add edges all the way around an object. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to add edge loops at important points on the bat. So this is going to be important angle changes. We have an important angle change right here where it goes from this kind of flat surface over the top and then angles down. And then we've got that important angle change right here where it's going into the knob at the end. So with both of these in place, I can take my vertices again, and I'm just going to scale them up to match those in profile there. Something like that. Now let's actually just get the ends pretty much done. So for the end here, I'm going to take these last vertices and move them in place right here. Now you'll notice that the bat is kind of round here on the end. Keep in mind that this image has perspective distortion, so it might not actually be fully round there. Just keep that in mind. We could add a little bit of roundness there if we wanted to though. So we've got that. Let's add another edge loop right here. Now, since I've already used the multi-cut tool, that was the last tool I used. Instead of having to hold down Shift, right click, multi-cut again, what I can do is just hit the Y key. Y is in yellow. And that will repeat the last tool that I was using. So now I can just add another cut right here. Select those vertices, scale them up. There you go. I've got that end. And let's actually round out the very, very end here. Just trying to think the best way to do that. Well, we could just kind of pull these out and add more cuts, but I'm going to show just another way of doing it, just for the sake of demonstration. So I want to round out this end, just get a nice kind of taper there. So I'm just going to select all the faces here at the end. Now the way I'm going to select these, this is just the faster way of selecting. Instead of doing one by one, like that, I just click and drag to select all those faces, and you'll notice that it's selected right through the object. So once I do that, I just hold down Control and click and drag to deselect all the other faces. And you can see if I do that, it's just doop, boop, done. Very quick, very easy. I've got all those selected. So we could keep doing this with the multi-cut tool, but now, just for the sake of demonstration, let's use the extrude tool. So I'm going to do this by holding down Shift, right click, and I'm going to select extrude face. And I can just pull this out and then use the offset option right here and just bring that in. And this will allow me to just kind of round that out a little bit. Maybe offset that just a little less right there. And then I'm going to hit, in this case, G now to repeat the last action. So this is where it's a little confusing in Maya when you don't quite know what is what. The Y key repeats the last tool that you used. So the multi-cut tool is a tool. It is, you can see that by the way the cursor changes. It has the little knife icon and you can actually do something with it. G repeats the last action, which is when something just happens. So this would be like parenting, constraining. Extrude at least in older versions of Maya, used to be an action. Now it is an extrude tool. So Y would work as well. I just kind of hit G. G as in gorilla, out of habit. So I'm just going to extrude that once more. Boop. And then once again, use the offset. And just round that out ever so slightly. Like so. Now we get that nice round end right there. Let's do the same thing on the other end. So get over here. And once again, we just need to use the multi-cut. And I'm just going to add a few divisions here right away. And then you can select the vertices like this, or you can select the edges. It's going to be the same thing. With edges, one thing you can do is I need to select all of these edges here in a loop. But if I just double click on one edge, it'll select the entire loop for me. So now I can just scale this up, maybe move it back a little bit here. Double click on that edge. Scale that up. Scale this down right there. Scale that down. And from here, you'll notice I didn't quite center my image plane just right. If I wanted to, I could adjust it. It doesn't really matter in the long run. As long as I get it close enough. We're not trying to get this like scientifically perfect. So with this now, I can keep refining it and adding detail where I feel things are just a little too distorted. So for example, right here, see how it kind of feels like there's this big stretch? If I add an edge loop right there, I can just round that out a little bit more. Now, a good rule of thumb when you are modeling is that you want your faces to be approximately the same size as much as possible. So what that means is I don't really want faces that are really thin and then really wide over a nice smooth surface. If it's going to be a nice smooth area, the faces should be about the same size, approximately. This will make adding detail later on much easier, especially if you're going to bring it into ZBrush or something like that, or texture it later on. That helps a lot. The only time you really want detail to be smaller or bigger is if you have big expanses where there's really just nothing in there. For example, the length of this bat here, we're not going to have a ton of detail in there. That would be a waste of resources. Or when you want lots of fine detail. So for example, if you're modeling a face, you're typically going to have a lot more detail and a lot more polygons in the face than you would have, for example, in the chest or the stomach area, because those are just big planes of the body. Whereas the face has a lot of fine detail that we want in there. So in this area, because it's kind of round and we want that nice roundness in there, I'm going to put a little bit more detail right there. And then for the length here, we're not going to really have to worry too much about that. Now I'm just going to take this little end piece here and just pull that out ever so slightly to finish out that round motion right there. There we go. So with that, we've got kind of a baseball bat. It's not quite a baseball bat yet though. It just is a big stick. So now we need to add more edge loops along the length of it and then just, again, match the image. Well, we could use the multi-cut tool for that, but that's going to be a little tedious, having to add all of those edge loops in there one at a time. Yeah, it's going to be kind of boring. Can we do that a little faster? Yes. We can do that by using the Insert Edge Loop tool. So if I hold down Shift, right-click, we have the Insert Edge Loop tool right here. And I'm going to actually open up the tool settings. And with this tool, we can add multiple edge loops right there. So let's try 14 to start with, see how that feels. And you can see I just have to click on an edge and it'll just add a whole bunch of edge loops for me. I think maybe let's try 16. So boop, right there. That should be enough. And now they're all perfectly evenly spaced, ready to go. At this point, all I need to do is select my vertices, match the width. I'm using the top edge as my guide here. Again, if the image isn't perfect, it's not going to matter, because baseball bats and most objects in general aren't all exactly manufactured the same. And then also, it's animation. We can do what we want. We could change these proportions to whatever we want it to be. There's no science to this. We're just using the image as a way to simplify this and make it a little faster to work. There we go. Now we've got our baseball bat. Done. So with that, we're pretty much done with this model. The last thing I would do for this is now set up the high-res version. So this is really dependent on how you're going to be animating and what you're going to need in your shot. A lot of times as animators, we don't really need a high-res version for objects. We can use the low-res just as we see right here. But there are times when it is nice to have a just more refined version of the object. And you can see that by hitting the 3 key on your keyboard right there. Now, in the case of the bat, we're not going to see much of a change. Essentially, what we're just doing is a little bit more smoothness. You can see it right here where it connects. That's the low res. See how it's very choppy, especially on the knob end right there. If we hit 3, nice and smooth. But we're losing that detail right in the connection right there. It just kind of softens out. And we can see this essentially, or much more easily, with a cube. If I take a cube here, this is the low res version of the cube. If I switch to high res by hitting 3, we get this. It just smooths it down. Now you'll notice that it's still very choppy. If your high res mode is still choppy, you can hit page up or page down to increase the resolution. Now it's nice and smooth. But it doesn't really look like a cube, does it? In order to retain the shape when you're going into high res or smooth mode, what you need is more edge detail close together where you want edges to hold. So for example, in the term of the cube here, I hit number 2 to see the wireframe of the low res with the smooth version of the the high res. And let's use the multi-cut tool and just add an edge loop right near this edge. Boop. As soon as I do that, you see how that high-res version is holding more to that side? We are putting more detail for Maya to kind of make sure that it holds that shape. So in terms of making this cube feel more like a cube, I just need to add more detail right through here, and then here and here. And now we get a nice high-res version of the cube, but it still feels like a cube. And you'll notice that the difference isn't huge. Let's actually take this. I'm going to go to show, and I'm going to turn off selection highlighting, so that way we just see the cube itself. Low res, high res. It's not a big difference, but see how we get that little bit of a shine to that corner, that edge? That's what I love about the high-res version. It just feels more real. The problem with this type of edge here, because it's just one plane and then another plane, this is an impossibly sharp edge. If you were to actually try to hold this cube as it is shaped right now, if it was to be a real object, it would slice through your hand, like right through your hand. You wouldn't be able to hold this cube on any of the edges. They would be too sharp. They are like a mathematical atom point of sharpness there. That's not real. There's no object that, not even a knife edge has an edge this sharp. So by having this slight softness, this roundness to it, it creates a more natural object and something that feels just more real. Now, all that said, with the baseball bat, that's what we want with this. Instead of having this really sharp edge here and this kind of just knobbly feeling where it's the term for this is called nickeling, when you see the edges of a round object. We want a nice smooth object. So to do this, all I need to do is add more detail to this end here. And I can do this in a few different ways. I could just use the multi-cut tool and add an edge right there, and that helps to keep it closer together. Or I could select this edge loop right here, and I'm going to use another tool, which is the bevel tool. So I'm going to hold down Shift, right click. We're going to go to bevel edge, and this just adds essentially a bevel right there that we can adjust. And in this case, add another segment right in there just to round that out ourselves and get that extra little bit of detail right in there. Now, that is going to hold that edge just a little bit more. We can go even further by probably just splitting this edge right here a little bit more, just to give ourselves that extra little bit of detail and also a little bit more of a taper right in there. So there we go. Now we get that nice hard corner and it just feels nice and smooth. This edge right here, I think I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take this and I'm just going to bevel it just to round that out here a little bit more. Get that nice taper right on the end. And then on the very, very end here, I actually want a sharper edge. So if we look at a lot of the reference, again, this is why reference is important. If you look at the ends of a lot of bats, they've got this sharp edge right here and then right here. You can actually feel that change of direction. It's just a little sharper there and very sharp right here. Not all bats have that. So for example, this one is nice and round, except for right here. You can see a little bit of that. Essentially, it's where what's it called? The lathe machine holds the bat and then spins to cut it into shape. I want that a little bit on our scene or on our bat. So let's actually, I'm going to take this edge and move it up a little bit to round this, or to keep my detail a little bit more even. So something more like that. And then right here, I'm going to take this edge and I'm going to bevel it, but I'm going to make it a very sharp bevel like that. Same thing here. I'm going to take this edge, bevel it, and just bring it close together like that. Now, when we go into high res mode, you can feel that little bit of a change of direction right through there. It's just a little sharper. So just shaping this a little bit more, get that nice roundness in there. I think I could maybe take that bevel and soften it just a little bit. It's just a little bit too sharp. So maybe somewhere around there. Something like that. And Cupid, hey, thank you so much for the sub. 18 months, geez. A year and a half. Thank you so much. Also, hello, hope you're doing well. Thank you so much. Okay, so I think we're pretty close to done on this baseball bat. I'm just taking a look at it, see how it feels. Now, one thing I highly recommend when you are modeling something, especially something that's supposed to be round and have like subtle angle changes, is change the material on your object. Right now we're using the default material, which is a Lambert. A Lambert is a very flat type of shading where there's no highlights, no lights like shines on the object. Well, I'm just going to switch this. I'm going to right click on this, go to assign favorite material, and I'm going to assign a blend material. This is just a little bit more shiny of a material, and this helps to see angle changes a little bit better. So you can see right through there, that shine really helps us to see and feel how that form is working for us. So I can just start to use this to help shape my object a little bit more. And see that shine just right through there. Like I'm seeing that it's kind of catching right here. There's something in the surface that's not quite right there. So I could probably just add another cut right here to round this out a little bit more. And I'm just looking at my outer profile here right now to see if I can get that nice round shape. Now, how important is all of this? Not really. Who's going to be looking at the end of the baseball bat and going, oh, nope, they got the angle wrong. Terrible modeling skills there. That's not going to happen. But if you just want to push your skills a little bit more, especially if you want to go even further with things, it's nice to know how to do that. And is this model for a project? Yes, it's for an animation that we're going to be doing next week. So I think that pretty much gets our bat in place here. So there you go. We've got our baseball bat. At this point, I can delete the image reference. We don't need it anymore. And we've got that. Now, the smart thing to do would be to save. So let me save this here. There we go. And can we texture it? If people are interested in seeing me texture it, I'd be happy to do it. I would probably texture it in Substance Painter, just because we can get a lot of really cool text effects and stuff like that in Substance Painter very easily. But the big thing that we're going to be doing is rigging it. Now, before we rig it, let's actually, just in case we do choose to texture it later on, let's do some quick UVs for the object. Now, UVs, for anyone who doesn't know, are the way textures are laid out. Essentially, it's a grid. So in 3D space, we have the X, Y, and Z coordinates. That gives us left, right, up, down, in, out. Textures are a flat thing. It's a flat image that gets overlaid on top of this object. And those use the UV directions. U is up and down, V is left and right. Or other way. I always forget. No, I think U is left and right, V is up and down. And UVs are very, very important. I can kind of show the importance of UVs here by taking this object, and we're going to add a texture to it. This is a good way to test your UVs. Just add a material, and the very basic thing to add is a checkerboard pattern right here. Now let's hit 6 on the keyboard, and overall, it's not too bad. Let's actually make the checkerboard pattern a little bit smaller. So I'm going to just repeat this, let's say 16 by 16. There we go. Okay, so why is it important to have this checkerboard pattern on here? Well, the important thing about the checkerboard pattern is that we need to have minimal distortion. You'll see that there's actually a little bit of distortion right here. See that? This is the high-res version having some sort of issue, so we're gonna have to look for that. But additionally, with the checkerboard pattern, the squares should all be about the same size, and they should be square. We are not seeing squares here. We are seeing a stretched pattern. This tells me that the UVs are not correct. And the reason this would be an issue is, let's say I wanted to add text, just like on our image. Let's bring our reference back here. If I wanted text on this and I create a texture and put text on it, that text would then be stretched over the model. We don't want that. We want it to look nice and clean. So these need to be square. They also need to be uniform, about the same size across the whole model. And additionally, look at this. That is definitely weird. And so is this end right here. Look at that. That texture is not working at all right there. So we need to make sure all of this is working as much as possible. It's not going to be perfect, but as close as we can get. So to UV something, essentially, you want to start by opening up your UV editor. And here we can see our UVs right there. This is the layout for the bat. And overall, it's not bad, but it's also not great. At this point, when you're modeling something, anytime you create a default primitive in Maya, so cylinder, polygon, or cylinder, cube, pyramid, they already have UVs built in. Then whenever we add and model and extrude things, it is just keeping those UVs and not really updating them correctly. So now what we need to do is just remake the UVs from scratch. Now, the way we do this is under the UV menu, we have a bunch of different UV presets you can use to start with. You have automatic UVs, which if I do this here, let's lay this out in a way that we can see everything. Okay. And actually, just to point out, you'll notice that the UVs are within this one grid, 0 to 1, 0 to 1. This is the UV space right in there. If you go outside of that, that creates a whole other set of UVs called UDIM, which is basically just, it allows for higher resolution textures. For this, we're not going to worry about that. Now, when modeling or rigging, isn't it necessary to apply textures before rigging? No. Ideally, you would want to do it before rigging, just because once you have things rigged, you want to do as little to the object as possible, because it's going to add construction history and make changes to it. We want to avoid that. So usually it's better to do it before rigging. It's not necessary to do it before rigging. So you see here, we did automatic UVs, and that definitely got our squares much more square. Now, just to actually make this a little easier, let's go to show, and I'm going to turn off selection highlighting again, just so we can see everything clearly. So you can see here that it's definitely better, but we're not getting good connections on the ends. And in our UVs, we've just got a lot of tiny little pieces right there. We've also got like these weird notches. Right, where was it? I saw it. Oh, I think it was on this end. Right here. So see how it's like notched right there? Right here and here. And then it connects in. It's just not lining up along the detail of the object. That's not great. So automatic is good for more complex shapes that don't really have a specific form. But for this, we essentially have a cylinder. So is there something that works better with this? Well, we have a few different ones that could work well. We have best plane, essentially is just going to base it off of one specific plane and create a projection. Camera based makes a projection based on where our camera is located. So if I angle my camera here, it's going to project the UVs from there. Contour, stretch, normal based, those are much more complex ones. We very rarely use those for things like this. Let's actually just do a contour based. You'll see it gets really weird. And these are horrible UVs. Like if we're trying to get squares here, that's just a nightmare. This would be horrible to try in UV. Now, the ones that I typically use are cylindrical, planar, and spherical right here, depending on what the object is, as well as automatic if I need it. Those are the main ones that I'll use. Best plane I'll use for objects that are at a very specific angle. Now, in this case, this is a cylinder. That's really what we've got. So let's try cylindrical mapping. And right off the bat, this is not great. It is going in the wrong direction. So I'm going to take this and I'm just going to rotate it. And let's see, rotate, let's see, X, I think maybe. There we go. So that's now rotated in the right direction. but it's too small. It's definitely nice square shapes right there, but it's a little too small. So I'm going to just stretch this out here. Whoop. Make it a little longer. And then let's wrap it all the way around like that. So you can definitely see that's getting there. Now they're a little stretched, so I'm going to shrink this down just a little bit, just to get the squares a little bit more square. Right around there. And then we've pretty much got it in place here. Now the big thing with cylindrical mapping is you need to know where your cut is. And the cut is a very important thing in any mapping. The way you can kind of think about it is, imagine you've got a cardboard box and you have to lay it out flat. We need to cut the box. Let's say it's a full box. It's not like with a lid or anything. It's just one solid box. To lay it out flat, we need to cut along some edges in order to be able to lay it out flat. That's what we're doing with this baseball bat. By UVing it, we're putting cuts in there and then stretching it out flat. And you can see these cuts here. Let's go into shaded view. The cut is where the white line is right here. So it's cutting along the length right through here and then all the way down to the end right there. But then right here, see how the cut goes whoop, whoop? Why? Why is it doing this? This makes no sense. There's no reason to have a cut right there. So there's a few different ways you can adjust this. If you're using your projection tools, you could adjust things like the rotation. So for example, if I rotate this, you'll notice that it changes where the cut is happening as I'm rotating the projection. But a lot of times, especially for like finesse areas like this, you're just gonna have to manually sew and cut these edges. So for example, I'm going to need to cut right here. So with this edge selected, I could just hit cut UV edges right there. That'll cut that right there. Then I'm going to take these edges and I'm going to sew them together. I'm going to do the same thing. Make sure there's no areas that have any weirdness right there. Let's do the same thing here. We don't need a cut there, so let's just sew it together. That should be good. Now our UVs are pretty nice. Now when you're handling UVs in the UV editor, it's good to select UV shells. That basically selects the whole UV as a unit. And then I'm just going to scale this down so it fits within that 0 to 1 space right here. Like that. Now if we look at our texture, nice, square, almost all the way through. Now you'll notice that it distorts along the length here. This is good or bad depending on what you want. So I'm trying to think of a good example of when this would be nice. Well, this is demo for later on. An area where this would be good is an area where you want the texture to stretch as it goes along an object. So what would be a good example of that? Let's say you had a parasol. It is going to be very similar. So make my brush a little bit bigger here. So you have an umbrella. Like that. And then I apologize for my terrible umbrella. Something like that. If we were to texture this and we wanted stripes to go down this umbrella, the stripes are not going to be the same length all the way down. They're not going to be straight lines like this. They will start small here and then widen out as they go down to the base. This is where you would want that stretch to happen, where if we were to UV this, the squares on the texture will be smaller here and then wider down here. That would be okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It would make our job easier when it comes to texturing, because all we would have to do is make a gradient and it would automatically size it to match the umbrella. Perfect. But in the case of a bat, the wood grain is not going to stretch and shrink. It's going to stay about the same size throughout. And we can see this in our reference here. If we look at, for example, this, that wood grain doesn't change as it goes down. It doesn't get thinner as it comes down here. It just, the bat is thinner, but the wood grain stays the same. So how do we do that? How do we make sure that it's not stretching or shrinking in some weird way here? Well, this is when we need to optimize and unwrap the UVs. So in the UV editor, you'll have the UV toolkit. There's the unfold options right here. And you have optimize and unfold. What these are essentially going to do is reshape the UVs. So instead of being square, like we could see how they were before, and just very straight, if I optimize it here, now it's trying to match the object's form and keep those squares more square. Let's actually, just to make it easier to see here, I'm going to make the squares a little smaller once again. So let's go 20 by 20. Okay. So you can see now the squares are definitely much closer to the same size. The one problem now though is that seam is much more obvious. So this is where, in terms of texturing, we've got kind of a problem. We need to optimize our uniformity of the UVs, but also minimize the amount of distortion as much as we can. And that can be very, very hard to do. And sometimes you're just not going to be able to do it at all. It's just going to have to be one or the other, and you hope for the best. Now, the way you can optimize it to get less distortion is to add more cuts. Essentially, and you see this a lot with like organic UVs on the face, hands especially. If you're trying to UV the hand as one piece, you're just gonna have, it's gonna be stretched in all sorts of weird ways. But if you cut the fingers as their own UVs, the thumb as its own UVs, and then just have the palm as its own section, it tends to hold its shape much better. So for example, here we're getting this really weird distortion all the way through, but let's try cutting it first. So I'm going to cut the ends off because the ends are tapering in, and that's causing a lot of distortion in comparison to just the round cylindrical section. So I'm going to take this, I'm just going to cut that end right there, cut it off, and then I'm going to cut this end off right there in terms of UVs. So now if we select our shells, UV shells, you'll notice that that end is now separate, this end is now separate. The other way you can kind of think of UVs is like clothing, when you lay out all the different pieces of fabric to sew them all together. So with this, if we now do the same thing, we'll just take this piece here and we'll optimize it. You'll see there's a lot less distortion now. The lines are much straighter here. And if we look at this, we're still going to get this seam. That's unavoidable because of the shape of the bat. But overall, much less warping through there. The big thing that I would want to do now is just make sure that I line up the UVs to an edge. So I'll select this, let's see, the UV shell here, and I'm just going to hit, where was it again? I think arrange and layout, and then I'm going to orient to edges. There we go. So I'll select this edge right here of the shell. I hit orient to edges and it just straightens everything out. The other tool that you have is the unfold tool. This is useful when bits of the UVs are starting to overlap on top of each other. For this, we're not going to need to worry about it. For the baseball cap, it might be more useful. So let's take these ends and we're just going to optimize those as well. And you can see, they're still really distorted here. Well, because there's going to be wood grain on here, I don't need to keep them shaped the way they are. Essentially what I can do is just do a different type of projection here. Because we've just got these cap pieces, essentially. Let me think here. What would be the best way to do it? We could cut it into more pieces, so cut it in half and have two separate pieces. Or we could do a planar projection. And let's rotate this here, so it lines up there. And essentially we just have these caps now that I can unfold. And we have these two round ends here. So you'll see we have that cap right there. And then this cap right here. And the squares are nice and uniform for the most part, except when it gets right there. We would just need to make sure to optimize those shapes and unfold them a little bit more. If you still can't get it quite right, we just might need to add another cut. So maybe another cut right here. And there's so many different ways of doing this. There's not one way that's like, you do that and it's going to be solid and totally done. No, it's whatever works best in that situation. So I think, honestly, I'm just trying to think how to minimize the amount of pieces and just keep it simpler. I think I'm going to add a cut right here. So let's cut this. And I'm actually going to sew this edge back together here. So this is all going to be one piece right here. And then the end bit right here is going to be its own separate piece. Now you'll notice that it kind of ruins our UVs. So if I take this and we'll just hit, let's do another cylindrical mapping for this. And there we go. Keep that all together there. Make sure the cut is working correctly. There we go. So you'll notice there was this jog right here, this little chook right there. I'm just going to rotate the projection until that lines up. Make sure it's all connected right there. And then from here, we should be able to take our UV shells and let's optimize them, unfold them. Do I want to unfold them? I don't think we need to. And there we go. So I'm just going to actually line this one up to an edge here, straighten that out, orient to edge, right there. And now I'm just going to select all of these and hit layout. And this is going to put them into that space and ideally keep the sizes relatively similar. Now here, I think the size is a little too big. Let's see. Usually it's a lot easier to see the size if you shrink the squares quite a bit. If they're too big, it's hard to see the relationship between them. So that's nice and square there, and about the same size square as it is there. There we go. Now you'll notice there's a little distortion in it. That's not too bad. And we're getting this cut right here. That's going to be tricky when you're doing texturing. And this is where you need to know how you're going to texture this object. If you're doing this manually, I would keep this all as one piece, like the very first thing that we did, just with the one cut that goes from the top all the way down to the bottom, and you just unwrap it that way. That's going to be the most efficient if you're doing it in, like you're texturing in Photoshop or something like that, because you're going to see the seam. Wherever we have this connection here, you're going to see that if you're not careful. But if you have a program like Substance Painter, for example, that is made for texturing, you can project a texture onto this object and it's going to take care of the seams for you. So we can show that in Substance Painter later on if we have time. But essentially, here we have our UVs. Now I'm actually just going to give ourselves a little bit of a gap between the edges of the UVs. I'm not a fan of the UVs sitting right onto the edge right there. So just shrank that down a little bit. But now we have our baseball bat and it's ready to go. And you'll notice that there are some areas where it looks like the textures are horrible right there. That's not a terrible thing. If we wanted to optimize that, go back to our UVs here, open up our UV editor. I could unfold this a little bit and it can sometimes help, but honestly, it's not a bad thing. It's really the shape of the baseball bat that's creating this weird distortion look. So there we go. We've got our baseball bat. Now, with this, we're pretty much ready to start rigging it. And why are there no AI tools to do this UV work for us? There are some, but the problem with AI tools is that they don't always work great. They are getting much better, but there's always kind of this manual element to it. And honestly, it doesn't take that long. Like if I wasn't explaining and trying to show all the different methods that we could use, this would have literally taken like 2 or 3 minutes to UV this thing. It would have been done in not very long at all. So once you know what you're doing, it really doesn't take too long for simple UVs, especially for objects like this. So at this point, we're ready to start rigging this prop. The big thing that I need to do now is I need to delete my history. All the changes that we've done to this object has all been saved. You can even see the very first creation of the polygon cylinder right here is still in this object. We do not want any of that in our object when we're rigging it. It's going to cause potential issues and just, it makes things heavy and liable to break. So we want to get rid of all of this. And this is why I always try to do my UVing and stuff before I rig it, because, well, those add to the history there. So I'm going to take this and I'm just going to go edit, delete by type, history. And with that, boop, it's gone. Now this object is essentially this object. It's always been this object. It has no history of what it was before. The other thing that I want to do is I want to figure out the orientation of the baseball bat when I bring this into a scene. So when I import this bat into a scene, how is it going to line up? And I'm thinking having it line up lengthways like this is going to be a little bit more annoying for the animators to deal with. So I'm actually going to stand this up. Maybe the other way. So something like that. And I'm going to rest it down on the ground here. Right there. Now, if I want to snap it to the ground, all I need to do is move my pivot point to the very tip here. So I'll hold down D to go into pivot mode, hold down V for vertex or point snapping, and middle mouse drag, boop, right there on that end point. That snaps my pivot point right down there. Then I can just take my Y axis right here. I'll select that, hold down X for grid snapping, and middle mouse drag to the grid right there. And now that object is sitting right on the floor, nice and perfect. And if I want my pivot point of the geometry to be back to the center, I can just go to Modify, Center Pivot, right there. With that all in place, I've got the bat at the correct size. I've got it in the position that I want it to be rigged at. I now just need to make sure all of my settings here are reset, all my channels. I don't want these random values, because if the animator comes in and goes, ooh, I need to set my bat to default, set the scale to 1. Now we have a tiny little bat again. So I'm just going to go to Modify, with the object selected, Modify, Freeze Transformations, and just make sure to freeze the Translate Rotate Scale. You want to do this before you do any rigging. If you wait too long, this could really mess up your rigging. So we now have this bat pretty much set in position, all good to go. Now the one last thing I need to do before going into any rigging is to name this, because it's not good to keep objects with their default names like this. So this is going to be baseball, or let's just keep the name, baseball bat. Baseball bat underscore geo. I like to add that underscore geometry or geo. It just helps to describe things a little bit more. Now, at this point, we need to start rigging this. And the rig could be very simple or very complex. Essentially, the reason we're rigging this is that we do not want the animators to have to animate this bat with the geometry. And this goes for all of you. If you're creating your own simple prop in your scene, a lot of us, I remember I did the same when I was a student. You create your simple prop, in this case the bat, and then you just animate the geometry. Great. Yay. Just get it in place. And that's not bad per se, but it's not ideal. As an animator, we very rarely want to animate the geometry of the object. Instead, we want to animate a control curve on the object. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. One of the big ones is, let's say I'm animating this baseball bat, and later on, the rigger or modeler comes up with a new baseball bat. It's better. It's got better textures. It's got just the proportions are cooler. It's just a more awesome baseball bat. If I animated on the geometry of my old one and I try to replace it with the new one, the geometry won't match and I have to reanimate everything from scratch. I can't save any of it. But if I animate on the control curve, and if the rigger, which most riggers are smart this way, will just keep the exact same control curves and replace the geometry on their end, when we bring in the new bat, all of our animation transfers over and it's done. So by avoiding animating on the geometry, we just make our work more efficient in the long run. So for the control curves, the very basics of it is you just want to go to create, NURBS, primitive, and circle. This is what we typically use for control curves. Now, the amount of control curves you add on here, it really just depends on what controls you want and how do you want to attach this to your scene. One thing I typically recommend is to have a root control or a layout control. This is a control that you're going to use to just put the bat into position in your scene or to constrain it to something. And then you will have your actual kind of master animation control, the thing that you would actually use to animate the object, as well as an offset control. something that you can change the pivot on the object, especially for a prop like this. So let's actually just start creating those. The first one is going to be our root control. So I'm just going to call this baseball and make sure I can spell. Baseball bat underscore root underscore control. There we go. The naming convention you use is up to you. I just like to make sure that I'm trying to think of the animator. If the animator is trying to select controls, they need to know what object this control belongs to. So if I just call this root control, is it the baseball bat root control? Is it the cap root control? Is it the baseball root control? Is it the character's root control? We don't know. By giving it the baseball bat, we know what that is. We know it's the root, and we know that it's a control. Same thing why we have the geo here. We know that that's the baseball bat geometry. So we've got that first control there. We're going to just duplicate that, bring this up, and this is going to be our main control. So I'll put this right around there somewhere, right near the handle. And let's actually make sure okay, good. I wanted to make sure it's wide enough that if we offset it up here, it's not going to be any issue. So this is going to be our main control. You could call it whatever you want. Master control. You could call it grip control. You could call it the pivot control, whatever you want. I'm just going to call it main right now. And then we're going to create an offset control. And usually I make the offsets a little bit smaller just because they're the control that we don't usually need to select as often. There we go. So we've got our three controls right here. Now, at this point, all we need to do is think of how do we want this to function. We want the root control to move everything. So essentially, we would have the root control here, and everything would follow that. Well, to put this simply, we could take all of our other objects and parent them to the root control right there. The way I did that is I just middle mouse dragged them into the root control in the outliner. You can also use the shortcut parent P right there to do the same thing. Now, if I move my root control, everything moves. Great. I want the main control here. As I move this needs to move the baseball bat. So I definitely know that my baseball bat needs to be under there. And then I need the offset control. As I move this, it needs to move the baseball bat as well and offset it from the main control. So the way you do this is you just parent the offset control to the main control right here. So it'll follow along like so. And then take your offset control and put the bat under that. So parent the bat to the control right there. So essentially, root controls everything. This will allow us to constrain the bat to something or just have it in place, put it in where we need in our scene. It also allows us to scale things up and down. We have our main control here. This will allow us to move the bat and swing it and all of this stuff. And then we have our offset control, which we can use to offset the position of the main control in relation to the bat. And now I can change my pivot point just like that. So that's the basic setup. And with that, we're pretty much done. But there's a few things that I would want to do to make sure that this is cleaner. The first thing is that you'll notice that our scale attributes are all off and our translates are all off. That's not good. I don't want there to be all of these extra little bits all over the place. It just makes things messy. The other thing that I need to think of is where do I want the main control and the offset control to be by default? Should they be at the grip over here? Should they be lower down? So for example, let's actually take the baseball bat out of here just for now. For example, these controls could start down here. And then I leave it up to the animator to move and offset the control where they want. Honestly, that's not usually a good thing because most animators will look at that and go, I have no idea what I'm doing, and just animate the bat from the end here. I don't want to have that happen. I don't want that off chance that the animator just forgets to offset it. So I'm going to make sure that that is in a position that most animators will want to pivot from, right in the handle here. And then they can choose to offset it if they want. And then the offset control, usually I like to keep together because these two controls work together. If I bring this and just like put it up here, it just kind of feels weird and can lead to some, what would be the right word? It just leads to confusion. So this is the typical layout that I'd want in something like this. With this, I can now just select all of these controls, go to modify, freeze transformations. Now you'll notice that, dang it, they shrank and disappeared. Why? That's because we grouped them all together. If you have them grouped like that, when they freeze the transformations, they are going to affect each other. So in order to make this work, we need to ungroup everything first, or unparent, I should say. You can do this by hitting Shift P, like that. Now that they're all separate, I can modify freeze transformations. They keep their shape, and then just reparent everything together. Boop, boop, like so. Okay, so now everything's frozen, everything's good. The next thing we need to do is we need to attach the bat in here. But one thing I am not a fan of is parenting the bat to the controls like this. The reason being, if I select the control, the whole bat gets highlighted like this. I personally hate that when I'm animating a shot and I select the control and the whole character lights up or the whole prop lights up. To me, it's annoying because I just want to see where the bat is and how it looks in the scene. I don't want it to be all wireframed. It distracts me. So instead of parenting it, I'm just going to constrain it here. And to make this a little easier, I'm going to create a little bit more of an organized setup here. I'm going to group my controls together. And I'm going to call this baseball bat controls. Even though we just have one piece of geometry, I'm going to group this together. Baseball bat geos. And this just kind of organizes it. It's a basic setup that I use for most rigs, most prop rigs. And I'll group all of these together and just call this baseball bat. And then sometimes I'll add group right there. So here's our baseball bat group. We've got our geo. In this case, it's just one piece, but if you had a lot of pieces of geometry, they would all be contained there. We've got our controls right here. Again, if you had multiple controls for a more complex object, they'd all be contained. And now I can just take my offset control and constrain the baseball bat group, geo group, to that. And the reason I'm doing that group instead of the actual baseball bat is, once again, if I had multiple pieces of geometry in here, maybe there's like a little thing on the end, a tassel that I want to have swing on the end here. If I add that in, it's not going to move along with everything else. But if I constrain the group, I can add whatever little bits and bobs I want to this baseball bat. If I want to put nails in it, well, actually, let's do that. So I'm going to constrain this first. So select the offset control, then the group. I'm going to go to constrain. I'm just going to do a parent constraint right there. So now everything moves along. And if I wanted to create a nail and just create like a post-apocalyptic baseball bat with nails hammered through it, let's kind of do that. I'm just going to duplicate this here, duplicate this, and just, we've got a whole bunch of nails right through there. I can just take these, add them to that group. Everything moves along with. So it makes it much more versatile later on than if I just constrain that geometry directly, because then I have to do a little bit more selective, like I have to do things in a certain way. Yeah, exactly. If you want a rubber or an aluminum bat, I could easily just add a rubber sleeve to the handle. Done. And then I've got an aluminum bat, and I just change the texture to it. So it just gives you more versatility by having this kind of setup here. So with that, there's our baseball bat. Let's save the scene. And now we have our root control that we can use to reposition it. We have our main control that we can use to animate it, as well as an offset in order to pivot it from different locations. So if I need to pivot it from the end here, maybe they're going to put it on the ground and just kind of lean on it like it's a cane or something. Done. Or if they're going to balance it on the end of their finger right there. Done. There we go. A very simple rig, but in most cases, it's all you need for an animation like this. Now, if we wanted to go a little bit more detailed on this, we don't necessarily have to, but let's say I want to be able to bend this baseball bat just a little bit, very simply, without going into skinning and all of this more complex stuff. I just want to be able to get a simple bend in here. I can take my geometry and add a non-linear bend deformer right there. And this will allow me to bend the bat right there. Now, typically you wouldn't want to bend at the handle here. So I'm going to take my low bound right there down. That'll make it so it only bends on one half of the bat. And then I'm just going to take this deformer and bring it down a little bit more. So we kind of bend at, not past the handle. And now I can just do this right there. And now we can get quick little smear frames super easily right there. So like that. Now, the big problem here is that if I do this and then move my baseball bat, you'll notice that, ooh, it distorts. That's because the deformer isn't moving with the object. So this is why we have our group. All I have to do is take my bend handle, put it in that group there with the geometry. There we go. So now we can very easily bend the baseball bat and get some smears in there. So again, with this, we're pretty much done. But, there's always a but. What if we want it just to be a little bit cooler for the animator? We want it to be a little bit more refined. And what I mean by refined is essentially making it so that as they adjust things, how to put it? It just works more efficiently and they don't get into issues with the bat. So what I mean by this is, for example, right now I can select the bat's geometry. That's not usually good because if I select the bat's geometry, now I can accidentally offset it and I break my rig. I could accidentally select the bend deformer here, move that, break the rig. I could take these controls and accidentally scale them in weird ways and break the rig in weird ways. So at this point, what I want to do is kind of disaster proof my rig so that when I give it to an animator, they can do whatever they want to do, but not feel like they're always like one misstep away from breaking something and not knowing why, because they didn't build this. They don't know all the pieces that went into it. If they do something accidentally, they might not know how to get to that thing and fix it. So I want to disaster proof this. Now, one of the important things to do is, especially for the geometry and the baseball bat, just making sure that those aren't selectable. Now, the way you can do this is just take your geo group. This is again why that group is very important. I'm going to take that, go to my attribute editor, and under display right here, I'm going to go to drawing overrides. And I'm just going to enable the override. This basically overrides the way the baseball bat is handled right now, that whole group. And I'm going to switch the display type to reference. Reference essentially means that it's there, but it can't be selected. Now, I cannot select any of the geometry in that group or the deformer. Haha! Now the animators can just select things and not have to worry about accidentally selecting something they don't want. The next thing is, I don't need to see all of these attributes. For example, these controls right here, I don't want to accidentally turn off the visibility because then I can't see the controls. So I'm just going to take these and I'm going to take my scale attributes right here and visibility, and I can right click, lock and hide selected. Now, before I do that, I need to ask myself a question. There's a few different questions I need to ask. The first one is, do I want the offset control to be visible to the animator all the time? Probably not. Because if the animator is selecting things, and once again, I'm trying to think what's the typical workflow for the animator? They select something, click and drag, start to move it. Okay, click and drag, select, start to move things, and look at this. Everything's getting offset because it's very easy to accidentally select that offset control. Or maybe I'm not paying attention, I move that, and I've just ruined my whole animation because that offset control was there. And it's always visible, it's always just in the way. So maybe I want that to be able to have a switch. Probably on the main control here where I could have just this on-off for the offset control. The other thing that I would want is right now to bend the baseball bat, I would need to select the bend handle here, then open up bend over here just to change the curvature right there. That's tedious. Or if I want to adjust the up and down of it, like it's just tedious. I have to like adjust this up here and there. It's annoying. I don't want that. I want the animator to just be able to select one control and go. And that's mostly going to be the main control right here. So for this main control, let's actually connect it to the other pieces before we start hiding and locking anything. So technically you could lock and hide things first, but if you actually accidentally lock something that you need, it gets kind of complicated. So I always like to do this first. So what controls do we want in here? We want a offset visibility. We want a bend attribute. We want a bend offset and a bend rotation. So essentially we want to be able to bend it and then bend and twist it like this, as well as adjust where it's bending. Does it bend higher up? Does it bend lower down? So for example, if I bend this here like that, okay, this is great, but what if we just want the very tip of the bat to bend? I would want something like this, where only the very tip is bending and everything else is straight. Or if we want the whole thing to bend like that. So those are the main controls I could see an animator using or wanting. So I'm going to select this main control here and I'm going to go to modify. And I'm going to go to add attribute right here. And these will allow us to add custom attributes to our channel box right here. Now, we wanted a offset. Let's see. I'm trying to think of a short name that's going to be very clear for an animator. Offset visibility, probably. Offset viz. So that's just the shorthand for the visibility right there. And we could probably capitalize it. So offset viz right there. And we want this to be an on-off switch, not a random number. So on-off in terms of data type is a Boolean. That's 0 or 1. So we'll add that. Boop. There we get our offset visibility right there. We wanted bend. Now the bend is just going to be a random number. We want as much control on that as possible. So we want the decimals in there. That'll be a float. That's going to be, a float is any number along with decimals. And we'll add that. We'll add our bend offset. Or sorry, bend rotation first. That's going to be more important. Once again, that's going to be a float just so it can rotate. And then we'll add our bend offset. Right there. Add that. There we go. So now we've got all of these new attributes that we can link up to other controls on our rig. And I've talked a lot about this on the streams in previous demos, but we'll mention this again here because it's very important. In Maya, there's a lot of different ways you can connect attributes together. And this is what allows you to simplify a rig so that you're not having to dig through every single control to find something. So in this case, for example, selecting the bend control right here, the bend handle, and then trying to adjust everything everywhere. It just gets to be a pain all the time. Instead, we want to just be able to select one thing and adjust it. So let's do that here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the Windows General Editor's connection editor. The connection editor allows us to connect attributes directly. It basically just makes one attribute equal another. So let's actually just work our way down here. So offset visibility. This control should control the visibility of the baseball bat offset control. So in here, you have your left side, which right now, because we had it selected as our baseball bat main control, we need to load the right side now. So I'm going to select my offset and load that on the right. And essentially we're connecting from the left side, you can see it right here, to the right side. You can see that button right there. You can switch it as well if you want, but usually I go left to right. So I'm going to find my offset visibility right here, and I'm going to connect it to the offset control's visibility right there. There you go. And you can see the offset control now turns yellow because it's connected to another control. And if I take this now, I can just take this, turn that on or off. There we go. Now that offset control is built into my main baseball bat control right there. The bend control needs to control the curvature attribute right here. So I need the inputs right there and to adjust this curvature. So bend one, let's see, is curvature going to be in here? Yeah, right there, curvature. So I want my bend to control the curvature right there. And while we've got this, we want the bend rotation. This is going to control the actual rotate Y of the bend handle right there. So we've got our bend handle right here, whereas our rotate right here. rotate Y. Bend offset, that's going to be the up and down, the translate Y of the bend handle. So translate Y. So bend offset is going to control the translate Y. There we go. So what does this give us? Now, with this control, I can just take my bend, use this to bend the baseball bat. I can rotate it so that it's bending in a specific direction. It's not actually rotating the baseball bat. If we go into wireframe mode, you can see the base here is not rotating. It's just twisting in a different direction. So this makes it so that as the character swings through, we can bend it and have it follow the arc of the swing more easily without having to do some complex rotation and pivot. And then we can offset the bend up and down along the arc there. And Sleep Deprived, thank you so much for the sub. Aw, hello. It's been a while. Hope you're doing well. 24 months, 2 years. Jeez, how the heck has it been 2 years? Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Hope you're doing well. Okay, so gotta get back on track. What was I thinking of? Okay, so we've got all of our bends and everything pretty much set right here. So at this point, I can just zero those out and get ready to go. Now, one thing that I'm noticing is by default, the bend offset is zeroing out the bend way down here. I don't want that. Keep in mind, I wanted that bend to naturally start from around here so that the grip never gets bent. It's just the bat itself. The problem with that, though, is that, let's say, just round this out, 25. The problem with that is now the bend offset has this natural value of 25 that if the animator goes in and just zeroes things out, they're going to offset where the bend is happening. And again, they might not realize what the default value was, a value of 25. That's very random. I don't want that. That is going to harm an animator's workflow. So how do I get this to equal 0, but still keep that bend offset where I want it to be? Well, essentially what I need is a little bit of math. Right now, we have the bend offset equals 25, which will then go into the actual bend attribute, the curvature, and equal 25. They go 1 to 1. So 25 equals 25. What I want to do is create an offset where this is going to be 0, a value of 0 that has to connect and make the curvature equal 25. So I need 0 plus 25 equals 25. So, sounds very complex. Essentially, I just need a little bit of math in here. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to select my main control here. I'm going to go to Windows, Node Editor. I'm going to graph this out. So here's our baseball bat, main control. Here's our bend attribute. It's going into this unit conversion right here. That's basically taking a unit from one type of unit, and it needs to convert so that it works with another type of unit. Usually these you can kind of ignore. And it's going into the bend curvature right here. Now, essentially what I want to do is just have an extra plus minus node in here. So I'm just going to hit tab and I'm going to add a, I think it's, let's see. Trying to think of the name of it. It's not multiply divide, it's add subtract. No. Plus minus. I think it's a plus minus average is what I want. So essentially a plus minus average node will take a value and then plus minus or average it right here. So right now I would want to have the value equals 0 on my main control, and the curvature control equal 25. So it's going to be 0 plus 25. I need to have a sum in here. And then, let's see. Actually, is there... I feel like there's a different node here that I want. Now, one thing that I kind of wish the node editor has, and maybe it does, I just never found it, is a list of all the different tools you can add in here. Let's see. If you can't find that, so for example, I feel like there's another node that I want and I can't find it here. Just go to your your rendering editor's Hypershade. The Hypershade has its own node editor, as well as this really nice node box, which has all the different nodes that you would want. So I'm just going to go to Utilities right here and look for the one that I want. Let's see, multiply, divide, that's not what I want. Okay, I guess plus minus average is what I'll need. Okay. I just figured there might be an easier one. Oh well. Okay, so plus minus average. So what we need to do here is we need to take our bend attribute and we need to connect it into one of our inputs. So I'm going to go into 1D right here. And then our output 1D is going to go into the unit conversion right here. Like so. So we're inputting into 1D, we're outputting from 1D. And the way a plus minus average node works, or any of these types of nodes work, is it'll take the input from 1D and then add it to 2D right there. Or sorry, not 2D, into this other node right here. 1D1 right there. So, let's see. How do I want to do this? I actually don't use this node too often. Actually, 1D. Okay, actually, I wonder if I should go into 2D here. Yeah, that might actually be better. So let's instead go to 2D. This is me trying to learn this node here. There we go. And then we're going to add 25. And we're going to output there, like so. So to go over what we're doing here, we're taking our bend attribute, going into the input 2D right here. We're adding 25 to it right there because we're in sum mode right there. And then we are outputting that value into the input here. So that should work. Yeah, so you can see how that is now higher up here. I believe it's worked. So if I zero this out, dang it, didn't work. Okay. Plus minus average nodes are always the one that I trip up on. The multiply divide, those are nice and easy. I love multiply divide. These ones are a little bit more of a pain. Let's see. It adds. Actually, no, wait. 2D, 3D. Yeah, we don't need a 2D node because 2D is basically 2 dimensions. You can actually see it here. So if I input something into the 3D, you have 3 axes right there. We only need 1D because we're only dealing with one number. But now I just need to add in another value in here. And the problem here is that it doesn't have an easy way of adding that in. So let me think here. I'm just going to try something. I'm going to just put the translate X in here. Got to think about this. Now, actually, this is a good point. There are times when you're trying to do something in Maya and it's like, I have no idea how this works. What the heck do I do? In those cases, just look online. This is one of those things where in Maya, especially when you're doing these types of rigging things, especially when I'm doing Python scripting, I never just memorize it all because there's too much to memorize. So you just go online and search it. Maya has a really good help setup. So I just went online, I did a plus minus average node in Maya, and now we can kind of see how do we use this. Okay, sum, as the values in the input list as in the following formula. Output, input 1, input 2, yeah, okay. So values in the list can be added, subtracted, or averaged. Okay. So we have that. Let's see how we can use it. Oh, that's a lot of text. I just want a simple little demo here. Okay. Yeah, that's a little, I want a simple solution. So let's see. Let's see here. If this is not working for me, float math node, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I might need to use a different node just for simplicity. Yeah, float math is going to be much better. So this is one of those cases where it's more of a pain to deal with. This here, the plus minus. Float math, look at that. That's what I was looking for. Simplicity. So we're just going to take that bend, connect it in here, float A right there. It's going to add 25, out float there, done. See, that's how it should be. Nice and simple. Trying to figure out complex math? Nuh-uh, not for me. I am not for that. So this should ideally do it. So bend curvature. Am I getting the right bend attribute here? Add, subtract. Okay, good. Oh wait, duh. I'm taking from the bend. I need the bend offset. That explains it. Ah, so sad. Translate away. There we go. Now it's working. Okay. So main control, bend 0. And where is our bend offset happening? Okay, too low. So I need to reverse it. Let's do negative 25. There we go. Now bend offset is at 0. That's in the correct spot. So a lot of playing around. Essentially all we needed was that little float math node. That's was the trouble point right there. And then you just connect it to the right attribute. Don't get it mixed up like I did. And there we go. Now, just to kind of point out, this is normal. Like when you're trying to rig stuff up, you're going to run into issues like this. And this is actually one of the things I like about streaming, is so that hopefully you guys can see the troubleshoot process, because it is not clean and simple. A lot of it might seem like, oh yeah, just do this, done, haha, what a beautiful rig. And then you try it and it's like, wait, this node doesn't work, and wait, this doesn't work, and I didn't connect it here, and what the heck is going on? There's going to be issues. That's normal. It doesn't mean that you're a bad rigger, that you're a bad animator, that you're bad anything. We're dealing with a program that's got like a billion things that you can do in it. And it's okay to forget one step or two or something like that. And ask for help if you can't figure it out. That's part of it. Especially when you're working on a team, do not expect to be the one person who does everything flawlessly and perfectly and never has to ask for help. That's the best way to run into a lot of brick walls. You want to be comfortable asking for help and comfortable knowing that you're going to make a mistake, and that's okay. You're going to get it in the end. So we finally did get it in the end. So at this point, we've got our control here. It can bend the baseball bat right there. We can rotate the baseball bat and offset where it's bending. Perfect. Now we've got that exactly where we want it to be. Now, actually, I think my bend curvature here is a little tall, so I'm just going to adjust that. So that's the right in here, the high bound. I'm just going to bring that down a little bit, just so the deformer is not too big. Okay. So at this point, we don't need to see this bend handle anymore. So I'm just going to turn that off. Don't need to see it, because all of our controls are right here. At this point, what we can do is we can, let's see. Yeah, at this point, we can hide all the attributes we don't need. No, wait, actually, there's one other thing I want to control, and that is the scale. I want to be able to scale this control and have it actually scale the baseball bat as well. So that as I scale this, everything goes up. Now, the way I can do this is ideally, I can just take this group here, let's actually test it, and I can scale this up and down, and everything should work. Let's test it, make sure. Yep, everything's working. Great. But there's an issue here. I don't want the animator to have to go in here to select the group to scale this up. That's a pain. I want them to do it from the root control. How do I do that? Well, I don't want them to use this scale, because if they adjust this scale here, that then also adjusts this scale, what it's going to create is a double scaling on the controls compared to the geometry. It's going to be very weird. So I need to add a new attribute to this root control. I'm going to go to modify, add attribute, and I'm going to go with a float value, and its default value is going to be 1. This is going to be very important, because if it's a scale attribute, the default should not be 0, it should be 1. And then I'm going to call this master scale. There we go. Now, let's go to our connection editor. So general editors, connection editor. And I'm going to connect our master scale, and let's connect it to the baseball group attribute. control group right there. And I'm going to connect it to the scale attributes, X, Y, and Z. So this one master scale control is getting input into all three X, Y, and Z attributes here. Now, if I take this, I can now scale this up and down, and there we go. We have a master scale built into our rig right there. Now we're ready to hide any attributes that we don't want our riggers to accidentally adjust or fiddle around with. So for the root control, that's going to be the scales and the visibility. They shouldn't be adjusting the scale of the actual control curve, and they shouldn't be turning it on or off because maybe they won't find it later on. So I'm going to select all of those, right click, lock and hide selected right there. Now we'll do that for the other controls. So the main control, again, scales, visibility don't need. Lock and hide selected. Same thing with this offset, scale, visibility, lock and hide selected. And the reason I'm locking it is so that even if they activate the scale manipulator, they cannot do anything with it. There we go. So with this, we now have a rig that the riggers can use to animate a baseball bat. It's very simple, but it's set up in a way that any animator can use and not accidentally break the rig, as well as have all the controls that they need right at their fingertips. Right there. So there we go. At this point, we're pretty much done. So I'm just going to set this up here, save, and there we go. So with that, we've got the rig pretty much set up. At this point, let's see, I've got about 45 minutes left. I did want to do the cap demo, but at this point, I don't know if I'd have enough time to model the whole thing while also explaining everything. So I'll leave this up to all of you. Would you rather see me model the cap or texture the baseball bat? And then we can just finish the baseball bat. And actually with this baseball bat, since it's pretty much all rigged up, I'll probably be releasing it to all the AM students. I'll put it up in the AM resource library, so all of you can use it as well if you want it. Texture the bat. Okay. And Vraukus, I did want to mention, thank you so much for the float math node suggestion. That was a huge help. Let's see. So we've got one texture the bat, so texture the bats win. So let's do that then. And yes, thank you for the reminder. That feels better already. 2 times texture the bat. Okay, so texture the bat wins. So in order to texture the bat, there's a few different ways you can do it. And Animal, thank you so much for the sub. Aw, thank you so much. 21 months. Jeez, 21 months. How has it been so long? Doesn't feel like it's been that long. Why are people still watching after 2 or 3 years? What the heck? To texture the bat, we have a few different ways we can do it. The first way, and this is if you don't have any texturing software, something like Substance Painter, for example, is to export your UVs and bring them into an actual texture editing program. Or sorry, not texture editing, photo editing program, paint program. So I'll show that way to do here. I'm not going to do it that way because it's not the most efficient. So if you go under your modeling menu set, go under UVs, UV editor, I'm going to select my baseball bat geometry, and here are our UVs. Let's actually split these up a little bit more. And you'll notice I can't select these. That's because our group here is set to reference mode. So I'm going to disable the override just a little bit there and separate them out. I don't like it when shells are touching each other. It makes texturing a little bit more of a pain when you're doing manually. So we have this here. We need to export this out so that we can draw over top of it. So to do this, I'm going to select my UV shells, then go to, I haven't done this in a long time, UV snapshot, right there. And you can export out your UVs. I usually recommend a high-res image like a PNG or a TIFF format. Those are really nice, high quality. Don't go with the JPEG for this. And then you want to set your output size. Usually for textures, you want 1K, 2K, or 4K textures. I recommend 2K or 4K. Usually those are just a little bit, it gives you more quality over it. 1K textures, if you're doing something small, sure, but typically you want kind of more detail. So we'll just stick with a 2K texture right here. And our UV area, we're just doing tiles 1 to 1 because we're doing this from 1 to 1 right there. That's square. And let's just save this to my desktop. Call this bat UVs. Apply and close. There we go. That should be saved. Let me see right there. Yep. So now I can take this into something like Clip Studio Paint if I have that. And there are my UVs. Let's actually add some layers right there so we can see them a little bit more clearly. There you go. So now I can just draw over top of this and use this as a guide, and there's my texture. So I would just draw in the text, anything like that. With stuff like this, I would try to keep it simple. Don't go with like complex wood grain because those seams are going to be very noticeable. So for something like this, let's do a very simple texture here. Let's do what color should our bat be? Let's kind of do a blue bat here. We could add some text. I think the text editor in here is a little bit wonky. Actually, let's do this in Photoshop. Just because I know how to use Photoshop's text a little bit better. And then I can also show something else with Photoshop, which is really cool. Okay. So we'll do this. Now you'll notice that our UVs are kind of hard to see sometimes. So if ever you have that, what I like to do is I'll add a bright green like fill layer over top. Or if you've got a PNG, you can just lock the transparency and just fill that and make that nice and bright green like that. It just makes it show up over a lot of different colors. So we've got white and blue and it says swinger on it. Definitely, we can do that. So let's do a blue bat. Maybe a little more saturated. There we go. We'll add a white stripe on it because I don't want to go too far towards the end. So I'm not going to go white all the way through. But let's add a rectangle right here. We'll add a white stripe, and maybe actually on that white stripe, we'll also add a gradient to it. It's good to name your layers in Photoshop as well. And let's actually just do black to white. And I'm just going to multiply that. Oops, wrong layer. So we just have a little bit more something right through there. Just trying to think where I want the gradient to go. Let's go up and down like that, just for the heck of it. Very faint. Okay, and now we're going to add some text. So I'm just going to take my type tool. We'll call this Swingers. Now, the worst part of text for me is finding a font that I like. Let's see. What's a fun font? Something that you see on a baseball bat. Let's see. Cartoony? Do I have a cartoony font? Oh, there you go. Dungeons and Dragons baseball bat. There we go. And oh, interesting. For some reason, my shortcuts in Photoshop are not working. There we go. So we're going to take that, rotate it, and I'm not sure what the size is going to be. So we're just going to keep it like this for now as a kind of base here, and then bring it in and see how it looks and then make adjustments. If I go too far right now, I might be making work for nothing. So let's save this here. I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to save to my desktop here. And you could actually bring in a Photoshop file into Maya. It's really nice. I usually use TIFF format or Targa or PNG, something like that. And this is going to be BAT Texture Manual, because we did it manually. And no compression. Okay. So go back to Maya here. And now with our baseball bat selected, we actually do have a texture on it, the checker pattern. So I'm going to go into my attribute editor, go to the blend attribute right here. And I'm just going to break that connection, get rid of the texture, and apply a file to it. And we're going to find our file right here, BAT Texture Manual. And there we go. There's our bat with our swingers on it. And it's a little small. I would make the text a little bit bigger and maybe taper this down because it's taking up the whole handle right there. So I would just kind of reshape that a little bit to flow a little bit more. But there we go. You could add whatever textures you want, whatever images you want on there. The big thing is that you try to avoid the seams. So for example, if I got that text right along this seam here or past these endpoints, you're gonna see that, because these types of texturing programs like Photoshop and Clip Studio, things like that, they're not thinking of 3D space, they're thinking of a 2D plane that is then kind of stitched back together. So that is their limitation. Now, Photoshop actually does allow you to bring in 3D models to it. So let's take our baseball bat here and texture it a slightly different way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my baseball bat geometry, I'm going to export it, and I'm going to export it as an OBJ file. You can do OBJ or typically FBX for other programs. I wonder if Maya does FBX. Let's see. I'm going to export it as an FBX file. And I want to make sure that I include any texture info and anything like that. Let's export that. So this is our baseball bat FBX. That's fine. And then I'm just going to do another one just in case as an OBJ file, which is an object file. OBJs are an older type of file, but they work pretty well for a lot of things. Okay, so I'm going to export all of those. Now, in case you don't see OBJ or FBX, you can find that under Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager. So under For the OBJ, it's right here. I think FBX is on by default. OBJ is right there. OBJ export. You need to turn that on. So let's take those files here from my desktop and see if Photoshop is going to open them. Okay. Let's try the OBJ. So if you have Photoshop, of course, they're being discontinued. Dang it. If you have Photoshop and it hasn't been discontinued yet, you can texture your baseball bat in here. And this is a 3D workspace, so you can just draw over top of it and you get no seams in there, which is really cool. But this is not my favorite way of doing it because Photoshop isn't really made for this. It's not the greatest for this kind of stuff. And it's kind of a pain, just the layout. I've done it on a couple of projects and I didn't have a good time with it. It's kind of more of a pain. So you could do it if you wanted, if you have Photoshop, yay. For me personally, I use Substance Painter. Substance Painter is essentially a program that is made for texturing 3D objects, and it is awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start a new project. We want a 2K resolution here, and usually the PBR metallic roughness alpha blend is a good way to start. Essentially what it means is all the different maps that you're going to have. You're going to have a metallic map, a roughness map, which is how shiny it is, an alpha blend, which is transparency. Those are really good ones to have. We don't really need a coded map or SSS, that's subsurface scattering. That would be if you're doing skin, and sheen as well, don't really need. So this one's good for most objects. So we've got that. Everything else. Okay, the important thing is UV texture settings. Are you using a UV tile workflow or are you using UDIMs? UDIMs is when we have that 0 to 1 space, that one square. If you're using multiple squares, you want to make sure to activate this. If you're only using that one square, you don't need that. It's going to cause issues. And I think everything else is good. So we just need to select our file, which is going to be our FBX file right there. Bring that in. And there's our baseball bat. And here's our UVs right here, ready to go. So let's actually just look at it in 3D view only. Right there. Now, if you're using Substance Painter, one thing that by default I'm not a fan of is the anti-aliasing on the edge is very extreme. So if you go under, I think it's the world settings here, shader settings. I think it's here, or is it? No, here, under display settings. Where is it? You can turn on anti-aliasing. I always forget where it is. Wireframe channel display grid. I don't have to change this, but it's just, oh wait, there you go. Temporal anti-aliasing. There we go. So right there. See how suddenly it's just a little smoother compared to this. I just like that. Whenever I see these sharp edges, it just kind of distracts me. Now, actually, before we get into this, Miguel, excuse me, do you have a video where you explain how to load many textures? I brought a prop building, and there are about 40 objects there with many different textures in the folder. I want to know if there's a way to avoid loading them one by one. So I I do have demos that I've talked about this, but I can just show it here because it's super quick. If you have a lot of textures that you have to bring into a scene, usually on a rig or a big prop like that, just go to Windows, General Editors, File Path Editor, right there. This will show you the path to your texture, and if it's not loaded, there's going to be an X right there. So you just select the one that's not loaded, hit Repath Files, browse to the folder with all your textures, hit Repath. It'll connect all 40 textures right there for you, and you're done. And that's it. So just hit Repath there, good to go. And you can do this for any objects. If you've got like 200 objects that you brought in, each one of them has like 3 or 4 textures, you could reconnect like hundreds of textures in seconds. It definitely beats doing it one by one. When I started animating as a student, I used to do it one by one because I didn't know about the file path editor at the time. And it would take forever. Even just 10 textures, it takes forever to do it one by one. Ugh. So here we have our baseball bat here in Substance Painter. And with Substance Painter, the nice thing with Substance Painter is that it is a program that is built for texturing 3D files, which means that everything that we can do here is made for and optimized for this type of setup. So for example, let's say I want a wood grain texture on this. Well, we've got a whole bunch of different materials here that we can add to this bat. So let's say maybe we wanted a cobalt texture, a metal bat. There we go. Metal. Done. But let's go more for wood. So let's see, do I have a wood texture here? We've got this one. So we're going to use this. It's not the best for a bat, but it'll do for now. The nice thing with Substance Painter is it has a huge library of free materials you can get as well. So if I wanted a different wood material, that would be no problem. But let's add that on there. And you'll notice that, haha, we've got a wood texture and it's all nice and cool and shiny. But 1, the wood grain is going in the wrong direction. And 2, we're seeing a seam. Ah, that's not great. Well, to get the texture in the right direction, we can just rotate it right here. There we go. Now it's going in the right direction. We get a nice cool wood grain effect, but we still see the seam, especially right there. How do we get rid of that? Well, instead of using a UV projection, which means it's using the UVs, we can use triplanar projection, which essentially creates a box around the object and projects the texture over top of it in 3D space, which essentially means no seams at all, because the texture is being projected across the entire thing. So with this, I can now just rotate that texture in place. Maybe, let's see, where's my scale of it? Let's tile it a few more times just to get a little bit more wood grain. So something like that. And we get this beautiful wood grain texture across the whole thing with not a single seam in sight. That is wonderful. It is amazing. The other thing that it does is because it's projecting it, is going to keep the texture nice and even without the UVs distorting the size of it at all, which is really nice. Now, along with this, I am noticing that, well, there's this kind of roughness and you can see grooves and stuff in the wood. The wood shouldn't really have grooves and dips and all of that in there. So I might take off the height map here. So the height map is being applied and it's actually adding basically a bump map over top, which is adding all of that, those extra little details. Don't really want that on this baseball bat. It should be nice and smooth and polished. Same thing with the roughness. we don't really need a roughness map because there'd be a global sheen and coat over top of that. But for now, we're just going to keep that because it does add a little bit, and we don't need a metal layer on there either because, well, it's not metal. So with this, we've got our baseball bat. And it's nice and wooden. Now, let's see, does the triplanar allow you to use end grain for the end and blend that into the side grain? No, but you can create your own end grain. So let's do it this way. So let's say I want to create end grain where it's actually got that different direction because the grain shouldn't wrap around. That's not realistic. That's not how wood works. There should be an end grain to that. So for the sake of demonstration, let's say this is our end grain. I'm just going to add that on there. And I'm going to do a triplanar UV projection on that as well. So we've got this on here. And let's say, okay, this is our end grain. So I have this other material. What I can now do is just add a black mask over top of it. That basically hides it, masks it all out. And then I'm just going to use a soft brush and paint over top of the rough wood here. So just make sure I'm using a nice soft, basic soft brush here. I'm going to turn down my flow. And let's make sure the size isn't too small. I can just paint that wood grain in, that end grain, right in there. And have it just kind of taper into the other grain. So this is where I would want to find a bunch of different grain textures online and just get them in there. So now I can put my own caps right on there. Or, for example, let's say I want to just paint a cap. So for example, if we look at our baseball bat examples, you'll see that some of them have this end here. Well, if we add that on there, we don't need to worry about end grain. So, let's go back in here. I'm going to add another layer. And let's see, do I want to add a paint layer or a fill layer? I typically like to use fill layers. The reason for that is I can just mask it out after. So for example, I can add a layer here over top. Let's add a material to it. Actually, I wonder if they have any materials here that would be good for the wood, just out of curiosity. Let's try this one, see what's... it's about the same. So this one is a much more in-depth wood texture. So you have all of this different grunge and whatnot you can turn on and off. We don't really need that. But I want to add just a very simple kind of plastic. Let's see, glossy. Then we'll do a matte plastic on here. And I'm just going to, once again, add a black mask. And then I want to make it visible right here. So we'll just take a round brush here and I could just draw it in, or let's see, stencil it in. So if I wanted a specific shape, I can just add a stencil. So let's actually do a round shape here. Do I have a good round shape? Just want a circle. Let's just use this one for now. And let's see. Now this is where I forget the shortcuts for stencils. This is nice. One thing I love about Substance Painter is if ever you need to know the shortcuts, you can just hold Control, Alt, or Shift, and it'll show you all the different shortcuts here. Okay. I can rotate the stencil, which is not what I want here. I want to scale it. Technically, I could just scale this up to bit. So I want the end here nice and round. And then I can just fill that in right there. So now we've got that end bit just covered in a plastic. I didn't get it quite right, but yeah. And let's take out this one. So we've got that in place there, and I can just keep adding whatever I want. So let's see. Let's add a paint layer and what would be a good one here? I want my stencils. I wonder if I have number stencils. I don't think I do. Well, we don't have numbers, but we can just put simple, maybe club right in there. So you can either draw with clubs, or like I was showing before, you could use a stencil. So just come in here. Don't want a material in there. I love this program. It's just so creative. You can do so many things with it. So stencil. We'll do a club right there. I know there's a way to scale the stencil. I just forget what it is. There you go. Zoom. Right click. I knew there was a simple thing. So I could just scale that down, put that right in the center. Let's paint this in what color? Let's just do black. And actually, don't want to do it in paint layer. Think. What do I want? Just trying to think what I want here. Actually, no. Like I said, I'm more of a fan of fill layers. The problem with paint layers is it's always hard to change later on. Whereas a fill layer, you can always just tweak the settings globally, which I really like. So for example, I could just make this black, like so, nice and shiny. And this is not the one way to do it. This is just a preference. Okay, good. So all of that. Now I can just add a mask. Let's create our stencil here. And then just, oh, why are you not wanting to draw here? Stencil. Let's get rid of the stencil for now. Interesting. My brush is not wanting to draw. Oh, yeah, lazy mouse is turned on. That's why. That would do it. The joy of trying to figure out why it's not drawing. So now we can just add that. And there we go. So you can keep going. Like, this is super basic, but you can see how that is a lot easier to get a nice clean texture just with very simple added in, done. So let's say we just want the wood texture, just this for now, just for the sake of it. What I can now do is take this, go to File, and I'm going to export the textures. And let's just export these to a folder on the desktop. Okay. And I'm going to output these as PNGs. That's fine. I'm going to export them as Arnold textures. This just makes them ready to go for Arnold rendering. We don't need the metal. We don't need normals or height or emissive. Really just the color and roughness. Let's see. Yeah, so right here. Color, roughness, metallic, normal, don't need those. Okay. So let's just export that. And there we go. Now we've got our baseball bat textures, and you'll notice that it's kind of messy looking. It's just crazy looking there. That's fine. It'll look good on our baseball bat. So now we can take this and then just relink our texture. That's the wrong one. Base color right there. And nice baseball bat right through there. Now the other thing I can do is our, let's see, specular color, I believe. Let me see. Yeah, specular color will be fine in there. Specular color is going to allow us to adjust how bright that specular is. So if I tie in our roughness pass right in here, we just get that nice extra grain and grit on there. You can see it very subtly right there. It just makes it feel a little cooler. So there we go. We've got our baseball bat. Nice and textured. It actually has wood grain on it. And all rigged, ready to go. So there we go. That's the baseball bat. Now, I'm actually going to probably spend some time actually texturing this and making sure it actually looks like a baseball bat and not just like a table leg. But I'll do that on my own time because I do want to research the right type of wood and just get everything really nice. But that's pretty much setting up the prop here. Now, I know a lot of people won't have Substance Painter. So just keep your props simple. And if you do want to texture them, just do simple UVs and then export the UVs and bring them into something like Photoshop, Clip Studio, whatever drawing program. You could do it with MS Paint, and just keep it simple. The more complex the texture, the more like grain and noise that you have in the texture, the more likely you're going to see seams. The more you keep it nice and simple, just clean, the more you're going to get just a nice finish over everything.